Don't usually agree with what 90-Day fiancé alum Florian Sukic has to say, but I think he was right about his criticisms of 90-Day. The last resort therapist Reba Corin-Thomas for her ill counseling of Gino Palazzolo and Jasmine Pineda. Florian is the husband of Stacey Silva, whose twin sister, Darcy Silva, is a popular figure from the franchise. The Silva twins even got their own spin-off, Darcy and Stacey, which Florian was also a part of for all 5 seasons. Florian and Stacey are rumored to have split since the show, after being together for almost 10 years. Florian and Stacey were one of 6 couples who participated in 90-Day, the last resort season 2. The therapy-style spinoff gave the couples at crossroads in their relationships/marriages a mix of individual and group therapy sessions hosted by therapists Reba, Dr. Janie Lacey, and James Kelleher. Outside of therapy, the couples partied together and coming led, which led to tensions among the cast, including between Florian and Jasmine. During the last resort tell-all, Florian exploded at Reba for how she counseled Jasmine and Gino, and I think his assertions were correct. Gino and Jasmine came to 90-Day, the last resort in a very bad place in their marriage. Gino had met Panama native Jasmine on a sugar baby website originally, and the pair began a long-distance, virtual relationship during the pandemic. Once restrictions were lifted, Gino met Jasmine for the first time in Panama in before the 90-Day season 5. While the pair said they loved each other, they fought constantly over Jasmine's jealousy and controlling personality and behavior. Despite that, Gino proposed to Jasmine in before the 90-Day season 6, and they applied for the K-1 visa. Jasmine arrived in Gino's native Michigan in 90-Day Fiancé season 10. The couple had issues over Gino's desire to have children and Jasmine not wanting more. She already has 2 kids she left behind in Panama. And over money, as Gino fully financially supported Jasmine. Against what thought was all reason, Gino and Jasmine married in June 2023, but their problems never went away. That's how they ended up on the last resort. At the resort, Gino and Jasmine had admittedly not had sex in 9 months because Gino and Jasmine always argued. Coming to the resort, Jasmine already had a romantic interest in a man, Matt Brownies, whom she met at the gym. When she sat with therapist Reba gushed about how she was in an open marriage and brought the idea up to Jasmine regarding her situation with Gino. To me, it didn't seem like Reba explained what an open marriage or ethical non-monogamy would entail, and I think Reba totally ignored that Gino and Jasmine would never benefit from such an arrangement, given all their core problems. All heard Reba say was that an open marriage would require rules and consent from all 3 parties, and did not counsel Jasmine in the ways it could make things worse. Jasmine ended up giving Gino an ultimatum of breaking up or agreeing to the open marriage with Matt, and Gino agreed during their recommitment ceremony. However, it got as bad imagined because Jasmine showed up to the tell-all very pregnant with Matt's baby. I feel Reba had a responsibility to recognize Gino and Jasmine would not work well in an open marriage, and she clearly failed. During the last resort season 2 tell-all, Jasmine proudly showed off her baby bump and that Matt was the father. She got called a pregnant W******E by her castmate Rob Warren, and Gino was visibly hurt by Jasmine's boastful pregnancy. The 3 therapists were brought on stage and were asked by tell-all host Sean Robinson if they were pleased by the couple's current situations. Do you look at these couples as being successful in finding out what they actually wanted in a relationship? Sean asked, "I think so," replied Reba. Moreover, when asked about Gino and Jasmine specifically, Reba said she wasn't surprised by the outcome. This admission appalled me because Reba should have known better than to push the open marriage in the first place. After Florian started in on Reba for her role in Gino and Jasmine's outcome, Jasmine defended Reba, saying she felt she was informed about what she was getting into. Meanwhile, Gino challenged Reba's notion that she counseled them correctly by asserting that no one explained to him that an open marriage wouldn't fit their situation. I understand why Jasmine defended Reba and Reba relished the defense, but thought it was totally unsavory as Reba took no responsibility as a professional who gave bad advice. Jasmine was the only one benefiting from the open marriage, and Reba couldn't see that she caused Gino to suffer. Things got heated between Florian and Reba when Florian gave his opinion on the poor judgment call of Reba to even think an open marriage would be a good thing for Gino and Jasmine. Upon Reba not taking responsibility for Gino relaying that he felt uninformed going into his decision to accept the open marriage ultimatum, Reba had a sharp retort. Yeah, so it's not my job to tell you what you should and shouldn't do. That retort is what set Florian off and got him on the offense. Look at the product you ruined her marriage, Florian slammed. Think it's really easy to point fingers. Talk to you guys about what's quired, Reba relayed. I think this exchange underscored Reba's inability as a therapist to recognize that she made a bad call. Instead, she doubled down on her giving legs to the open marriage idea that Jasmine ran with. While fine Florian to oftentimes be volatile and unconcise with his words, felt his blast towards Reba was spot on. Phil Reba should be embarrassed that she was the catalyst to Gino and Jasmine's marriage breakup, and Jasmine running off with Matt and getting pregnant. Reba clearly didn't understand Gino and Jasmine's situation, or she would have realized ethical non-monogamy would never have worked for them. Florian had a harsh take on Reba's counseling, but he was right. Hopefully 90-day. The last resort's Reba learns from this experience and doesn't give repeat bad advice in the future. You've ever watched a therapy session spiral faster than the actual relationship it was supposed to fix? Then buckle up, because today we're diving deep into one of the wildest, most misguided, and unintentionally chaotic therapy moments in the entire 90-day universe. Talking about Jasmine and Gino, the couple whose emotional storms could power an entire season on their own. But this time, instead of bringing clarity or healing, the therapist became the unexpected accelerant that turned a tense situation into an emotional meltdown. So grab your snacks, adjust your headphones, and settle in, because this is the 90 defense breakdown. Why the therapist was wrong about Jasmine and Gino's explosive drama. Let's get into it. First, let's set the stage. Jasmine and Gino aren't just a dramatic couple. They're a perfect example of what happens when two opposite emotional systems crash into each other without a strategy for survival. Jasmine communicates with fire. Gino communicates by disappearing into his internal cave. Together, they form a cycle that can only be managed with precision and structure. And that's exactly what the therapist failed to understand. From the moment Jasmine walked into the session, her emotional temperature was already high. Like volcano level high. She was pacing, her voice was sharp, and every word she spoke had the weight of 100 unresolved arguments behind it. Meanwhile, Gino sat frozen, barely blinking, waiting for the storm to pass. Now, any therapist who specializes in high-conflict couples would immediately recognize the signs. One partner is in fight mode, the other in flight mode. It's a survival dynamic, not stubbornness. But instead of grounding the room, slowing the pace, or setting structured rules for the conversation, the therapist did the exact opposite. She opened the floor. She said, "Tell me how you feel." And that was the beginning of the end. Because when you give an emotionally overwhelmed partner complete freedom to vent without containment, it doesn't create healing, it creates chaos. Jasmine didn't just share her feelings, she unleashed them. She went from complaint to criticism to personal attack in seconds. She wasn't trying to understand. She was trying to be heard at any cost. And instead of creating boundaries, the therapist nodded, encouraged, and validated the emotional intensity without separating the feeling from the behavior. That's the mistake. Good therapy says, your feelings are valid, but your expression is harming the communication. This therapist said, your feelings are valid. Please continue. And Jasmine continued. She took over the room like a storm front, describing every hurt, every insecurity, every perceived betrayal, while Gino shrank deeper into a defensive shell. Now here's the biggest misunderstanding. Gino's quiet was not emotional laziness, was overwhelm. When someone like Gino is put under emotional pressure, their nervous system shuts down to protect them. They literally cannot speak productively until they've regulated. But instead of recognizing withdrawal as a stress response, the therapist interpreted it as disengagement. She treated Jasmine as the emotional truth teller and Gino as the unresponsive problem. The power dynamic of the room instantly tilted. Jasmine felt justified in escalating. Gino felt blamed for not being able to process at her speed. And the cycle fed itself. High conflict couples require structure, time turns to speak, emotional grounding, pauses, rules of engagement. This therapist offered none of that. She sat back, asking broad, open-ended questions better suited for calm, emotionally stable couples who can tolerate discomfort without exploding. Jasmine and Gino are not those people. They need a referee. They got a spectator. And once the therapist placed the emotional burden entirely on Gino, suggesting he wasn't trying, wasn't listening, or wasn't invested, everything collapsed. Because when you tell a shutdown partner they're failing, they shut down harder. When you tell an overwhelmed partner they're not showing up, they disappear. And that's exactly what Gino did. He folded into himself like he was trying to disappear into the chair. But here's the twist. The therapist misread Jasmine too. She thought Jasmine's emotionality made her vulnerable, expressive, authentic. But emotions can be real without being regulated, and unregulated emotions are weapons. Jasmine's fear of abandonment drives her attacks. She doesn't want to destroy Gino. She wants reassurance. But fear comes out as fire. And without proper guidance, the fire spread. A skilled therapist would have interrupted the spiral by naming the pattern. Jasmine, you're escalating because you're afraid. Gino, you're retreating because you're overwhelmed. Let's slow down. Let's find the need under the reaction. But that didn't happen. Instead, the therapist let the fight escalate until it had a momentum of its own. And what happened next was inevitable. Jasmine felt unheard despite dominating the conversation. Gino felt blamed despite saying almost nothing, and both walked away more resentful than when they started. That's not therapy. That's emotional demolition with throw pillows. But why exactly was the therapist wrong? Because she treated symptoms instead of systems. Jasmine's loudness isn't the issue is fear. Gino's silence isn't the issue is overwhelm. Their dynamic isn't about who's right. It's about how their trauma responses collide. And the therapist never addressed that. Instead of mapping the emotional cycle, she played referee without rules. Instead of guiding the conversation, she watched it unfold. Instead of balancing space, she rewarded intensity and punished withdrawal. Therapy shouldn't amplify dysfunction. It should interrupt it. But this session didn't interrupt anything. It validated Jasmine's volcanic communication style and reinforced Gino's fear of speaking. After the session, the tension between them exploded even more dramatically, proving the intervention failed. And it failed because the therapist used the wrong framework. Jasmine and Gino don't need gentle prompting. They need structured, directive, emotionally intelligent coaching that acknowledges their trauma patterns and breaks the emotional car before it skids off the cliff. But instead, they got a therapist who let the car roll downhill, watched the wheels wobble, and then asked everyone how they felt about it. Spoiler, not great. And that's exactly why this breakdown matters, because sometimes a therapist isn't just unhelpful. They're part of the problem. And in this case, the therapist was wrong because she misunderstood the emotional architecture of the couple in front of her. And when you misunderstand the blueprint, the whole building goes sideways. Now that we've laid out the foundation of how the therapy session collapsed, it's time to dive even deeper into the psychological underpinnings that turned Jasmine and Gino's conversation into a full-blown emotional catastrophe. Because here's the truth. Their dynamic is not random. It's not just dramatic editing or reality TV exaggeration. Their reactions follow a predictable, research-backed cycle of conflict that any competent therapist should immediately recognize. But since the therapist didn't, we're going to break it down ourselves, piece by piece, so you can understand exactly why everything combusted the way it did. Let's start with Jasmine because she is often misunderstood. People assume she reacts explosively because she's angry or controlling or dramatic for TV. But the real root is fear, deep, chronic, attachment-based fear that activates the moment she senses emotional distance. For people like Jasmine, distance feels like abandonment. Silence feels like rejection. Calm responses feel like disinterest. And withdrawal feels like betrayal. So when she walked into that therapy room, she wasn't just angry at Gino, she was terrified. Terrified that her relationship was slipping. Terrified that her emotional needs weren't being met. terrified that she wasn't being chosen, valued, or reassured. When someone with this type of attachment wound feels threatened, their brain doesn't say, let's communicate calmly. Their brain says, fight, demand closeness, force connection, and that comes out as intense emotion, shouting, crying, accusing, pushing. Jasmine's explosions are not the explosion itself. They're the echo of a fear she hasn't learned to regulate. But the therapist didn't recognize the fear under the fire. She saw the fire and treated it like straightforward communication. That was mistake number one. Now let's talk about Gino. If Jasmine reacts to fear with emotional pursuit, Gino reacts with emotional retreat. His internal wiring is the exact opposite. When overwhelmed, he doesn't shout, doesn't argue, doesn't fight for space. He collapses inward. Think of a turtle pulling into its shell. That shutdown is not avoidance, it's protection. When someone like Gino feels attacked, pressured, or exposed, their nervous system into freeze mode, they lose access to their words, their clarity, and their ability to engage. They're not choosing silence. Silence is choosing them. But again, the therapist didn't recognize the freeze response. She interpreted it through the lens of typical couples therapy, where silence often equals disengagement. And because she misread it, she subtly blamed him. She nudged him to open up, to say something, to explain himself, not realizing that pressure was the exact trigger pushing him deeper into shutdown. This is what psychologists call a pursuer, withdrawer dynamic, and it's one of the most difficult patterns to treat. But only if you don't understand it. If you do understand it, it's completely manageable. The therapist treated Jasmine's pursuit as honesty and Gino's withdrawal as resistance. That flipped the power structure and doomed the session. But let's go even deeper. One of the most important responsibilities of a therapist is to create what's called a safe therapeutic container, a structured emotional space where neither partner can overpower the other. In high emotion couples, this container must be tightly controlled. Time-limited turns, clear boundaries, regulated pacing, intervention when escalation rises. The therapist didn't do any of that. She let the container crack. She let Jasmine's emotional intensity spill into every corner of the room. She let the pressure on Gino build unchecked. And once the container was broken, the session became unfixable. You cannot pour boiling water into a plastic cup and expect the cup to hold. The emotional temperature was simply too high. And here's where things get even more complicated. When Jasmine escalates and Gino retreats, both of them believe the other person is causing the escalation. Jasmine thinks Gino's silence is provoking her. Gino thinks Jasmine's volume is attacking him. They don't see the cycle. They only see the trigger in front of them. A good therapist would have paused everything and said, stop. You're both reacting to each other's reactions. This isn't personal. It's a pattern, but that never happened. And because it didn't, the pattern strengthened. Let's talk about another major failure, validation imbalance. Validation is not about agreeing with someone. It's about acknowledging the emotional truth behind their experience. But validation must be balanced. If you validate one partner more than the other, you create an emotional hierarchy that destroys trust. And that is exactly what the therapist did. She validated Jasmine's emotions loudly and clearly, while offering only subtle, muted support to Gino. The message was felt even if it wasn't spoken. Jasmine's pain matters more. Gino's discomfort is less important. That imbalance turned the session into an emotional battleground. Jasmine felt emboldened, Gino felt exposed. And the more validated Jasmine felt, the more she escalated. Meanwhile, the more invalidated Gino felt, the more he withdrew. It was a perfect storm, and the therapist stood right in the middle holding an umbrella made of paper towels. But the biggest failure, and I cannot emphasize this enough, was that the therapist didn't recognize the trauma responses happening in real time. Jasmine was in fight mode. Gino was in freeze mode. These aren't choices. These are instinctive reactions wired deep into their nervous systems from years of past experiences. When someone is in fight mode, you don't ask them open-ended emotional questions. When someone is in freeze mode, you don't pressure them to perform emotional openness. You regulate. You slow. You stabilize. You guide. That is therapy. What happened in the room was not therapy. It was emotional freefall. And once the session ended, the damage didn't stay in that room. It followed them out. They argued more. They trusted each other less. Their communication became sharper, more brittle, more desperate. Because instead of soothing the wound, the session widened it. And this is what makes the breakdown so important. The therapist didn't just fail to help, they made things worse. But now we're going to explore how this failure didn't happen in a vacuum. It came from misunderstanding the couple's emotional language. Because Jasmine and Gino don't speak English or Spanish or body language. They speak trauma language. Jasmine speaks in fear. Gino speaks in distance. And until that language is understood, no therapist, no matter how well-intentioned, can help them. But don't worry, because in the next section, we're going to decode their emotional language, expose the invisible rules of their conflict cycle, and unpack the exact tools the therapist should have used, but didn't. You're not ready for how deep this goes. Stay with me, because this breakdown is just getting started. Before we move into the deeper layers of Jasmine and Gino's emotional coding, we have to understand one crucial concept that the therapist completely ignored. Every couple operates with a hidden emotional contract. This isn't a written agreement, and most people don't even realize they've formed one. But it governs how each partner expects the other to behave, respond, listen, and love. When this hidden contract is broken, whether intentionally or by accident, the relationship trembles. And in Jasmine and Gino's case, that contract is built entirely on reassurance and stability. Jasmine's contract says, if I feel insecure, you must reassure me immediately. If I raise my voice, you must show me you care. If I panic, you must calm me. Meanwhile, Gino's contract says, if I feel overwhelmed, you must lower the intensity. If I withdraw, you must give me space. If I'm quiet, you must not attack me. These contracts are opposites. They are not aligned. They demand behaviors that contradict each other. That alone makes their relationship a high conflict system. And the therapist walked into that system without understanding its laws. If you break the unspoken contract of a couple in distress, you trigger a meltdown. And that is exactly what happened. But let's go deeper into the emotional language at play. Jasmine communicates pain through expression, intense expression. She doesn't bottle up her emotions. She externalizes them. She raises her voice, uses big gestures, lays out every insecurity with full force. Emotion for her is not an internal experience. It's a performance of survival. She believes that if she does not express loudly, she won't be heard. She believes that if she does not push, she won't be prioritized. She believes that if she softens, she'll disappear. That belief system comes from past wounds. Wounds the therapist should have recognized and stabilized. But instead, her emotional waves were allowed to crash unfiltered. Now let's translate Gino's emotional language. He communicates pain through withdrawal. His instinct is not to express, but to vanish inside himself. He folds inward not because he doesn't care, but because caring overwhelms him. He fears conflict the way some people fear drowning, not metaphorically, but physically. His body shuts down. His voice weakens. His thoughts scramble. His breathing changes. Anyone trained in trauma physiology would see this immediately. But the therapist misread the silence as stubbornness instead of disrespect.